Hi there, I'm Gideon Rose, the editor of Foreign Affairs, and welcome to another edition of Foreign Affairs Focus. Today we have the great privilege of chatting with Foreign Affairs columnist for the Wall Street Journal and newly anointed Pulitzer Prize winner, Bret Stephens, who also is the author of a wonderful piece in our May-June issue, Getting the GOP's Groove Back, How to Bridge the Republican Foreign Policy Divide. So, Bret, first, congratulations on winning the Pulitzer, and second, what is Republican foreign policy post-Romney?
I think it's really up for grabs. There are really two schools of the Republican Party, and it's at a somewhat fledgling nascent state, so I don't think the debate has really come out in the open, but you have people who would probably be, I describe them as big military conservatives. They think that a large military is part of what America is about. They believe that America is fundamentally a liberator nation, and for that you need a big military. And then there are the small government conservatives who aren't hostile to the military, but they basically think it's a big overgrown bureaucracy that could stand to be reduced. They're suspicious of the unintended consequences of government action, whether it's domestic or international. They look at what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan and they say, look, it was a noble but essentially a totally wasted effort because you can't redesign these societies to look like something you'd like. And so these two schools, you can call them sort of maybe the Rand Paul school, to take one senator, versus the John McCain school. I think this is the debate that is going to be taking place with increasing sharpness within the GOP establishment.
Are the neocons finally on the outs?
Finally. Well, I don't know. Look, I'm not quite sure what, and all neocons say this, but it happens to be true. I'm not quite sure what it is. What I've tried to do in this article is say that there is actually a sensible middle. And maybe this is what a neocon foreign policy, again, I'm using these terms very loosely and skeptically, might look like, which is to understand that the United States derives major benefits from having a supremely powerful military, from being the guarantor of global order especially in an increasingly disorderly world, that the money we put into the Pentagon also has net economic benefits for the United States, keeping sea lanes open, that kind of thing. But at the same time, looking with a bit more skepticism about what the United States can hope to achieve in terms of its involvements, especially military ones, around the world. Above all, one of the points I make in this essay is that neoconservatives, big military conservatives, need to understand that the American appetite for extremely long wars of the kind that we've just been experiencing is relatively limited. And so what you can accomplish sort of in a military sense with unlimited public support is very different from what you can reasonably accomplish when the appetite for foreign adventures domestically is never going to be great and has certainly been reduced since Iraq and Afghanistan.
Is there ever going to be, on the Republican side of the aisle, a sort of reckoning with what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, and will that inform future security policies, or will it just go into the memory hole?
Well, I think it's going to be debated for a very long time, just in the way that Vietnam and other conflicts, even Korea, are debated. Look, there are some. I mean, take someone like Bing West, or goes to Afghanistan, and the support for our troops, for their bravery, for their effort is limitless. But part of the thinking is these are societies that just can't be mended by endless American effort and goodwill, and perhaps especially so Afghanistan. I think the lessons from Iraq are a little bit different. Another view is, we could have had a pretty good outcome in Iraq had we not, at the last minute, really under Obama, withdrawn our forces completely, lost the leverage we might still have exerted with the Maliki government, maintained a kind of counterweight against Iran. I think those are debates that are going to play themselves out over a long time and in a healthy way. What I'm trying to say is we want to avoid what Henry Kissinger famously called the disastrous oscillations of foreign policy between isolationism and overcommitment. And having a Republican Party that avoids those oscillations and that understands that it needs to be the party of responsible stewardship of American power is a winning political as well as policy formula.
Is there a difference between the two American parties today on China?
Yeah, they're equally bad, but perhaps in slightly different ways. I've been very disturbed by the type of China bashing that we've seen. We saw, I think Romney was atrocious when it came to talking about China. Obama has taken a slightly more moderated view, but maybe that's because he has the responsibilities of actually being the president. We want the Republicans should say, Americans should say, look, we're happy to have China as an economic colossus, so long as it's not a regional bully. We're happy to see Chinese companies grow and invest in the United States and elsewhere in the West, so long as they're not hacking our computers and stealing our data. So we want China to emerge as a great economic power, but we want to avoid what happened 100 years ago in pre-World War I Germany, a country that increasingly feels that it demands its place under the sun and will achieve that place through military means. So how do you make sure that you, on the one hand, cultivate Chinese economic growth while tamping its regional ambitions? That's the kind of policy balance that I wish both parties would focus on, and I don't think either of them do a particularly good job.
Middle East, you have sort of three sets of issues, at least in the Middle East. Iran, Syria, and the other Arab Spring countries in turmoil, and Israel-Palestine.
Israel-Palestine, I think, a distant third.
A distant third these days, although it might come back at some point should things come off their perch. What is the GOP's attitude towards these issues? I
think this is one area of genuine consensus in almost all quarters of the GOP, although you don't know, a new consensus may be emerging, that a nuclear Iran, whether it's nuclear capable or actually a nuclear weapon state, is a real problem, not just for Israel or our allies. It's a real problem for the United States. And among other things, it would commit us to a security presence in the Middle East, which we don't necessarily want to bear. I mean, if the Iranians have a nuclear weapon, we will find ourselves entangled in this region for terrorism reasons, energy reasons, in a way that fracking and growth of domestic energy supplies in North America offers a kind of an avenue for getting out of that. So making sure that this uniquely dangerous, willful regime doesn't acquire WMD, I think is generally a consensus view on in the GOP. Syria is a much more difficult case because in Syria you have a detestable regime, a heartbreaking civil war, but you also have an opposition that is increasingly dominated by equally detestable types, al-Qaeda-connected groups and so on. It would have been much easier to engineer a better kind of transition in Syria had we intervened in a limited way early on. Now our options, I think, are much more severely limited because it's become this kind of Hobbesian war of all against all. So I had argued early on that, say, imposing a no-fly zone over western Syria, destroying Bashar Assad's ability to take helicopter gunships, gun people down, use his Scuds against his own people, that would have been well advised. It's now moving into a very different terrain. The one thing we don't want it to do is destroy whatever fragile governments we have, especially in Jordan, but also in Lebanon, and entangle the Israelis.
Bret Stephens, thank you very much. We'll have you back to discuss how these things play out after the next election.
Thanks for publishing me.